Cloud, make sure that it's up and running. It is, and now I'm going to turn it over to the judges.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Simons, and just because we're smiling does not mean we're going to take it easy on you. We are here to welcome you to Unit 1. We'll take our time to introduce ourselves, give you a little background on who we are, and then we'll ask you to introduce yourselves and your teachers, and then we'll get into the question. Like I said, my name is Mark Simons. I'm an attorney in Nevada, which is where you all know we call the suburb of California, but only for those who know us. Okay, so, and I've been practicing law for 27 years and been doing this for 12 years and just am impressed. I want you to be excited and to give us some energy and throw all your knowledge at us when you get the opportunity. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Charlie Hinderleiter. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for St. Louis Realtors in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a past political science professor, and many years ago, I was a student in the We the People program, sitting on that side of the proverbial table. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Hi, I'm Karen Milton from New York. I am a lawyer by training. I've spent most of my career, almost all of it, in public service, working for state, local, and federal governments. I'm the chief of staff right now in the Office of the Inspector General for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority that oversees the New York City buses and subways and the commuter rails in the greater metropolitan New York City area. Prior to that, I was the circuit executive for the Second Circuit, which means I was more or less the chief operating officer for the 13 federal courts in the 3 states of Vermont, Connecticut, and New York. I'm looking forward to our conversation and welcome you to Unit 1.
Can you introduce yourselves and your teacher, please?
Hello, my name is Gavin Stiles, and I am a junior.
Hello, my name is Hosanna Melania, and I'm a junior.
Hello, my name is Kai Moore, and I'm also a junior.
Hello, my name is Kaki Sawyer, and I'm also a junior, and our teachers are Mandy Hostetter and Matthew Fulford.
All right, we're going with question 1. When I complete the question, begin when you're ready. The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times?
In his 1787 essay addressed to the people of the United States, civic leader Benjamin Rush asserted that the Revolutionary War was only the beginning of a political upheaval whose ultimate goal was to create a lasting government based on revolutionary principles. Our panel defines these principles as fundamental Enlightenment-era ideas that the founders implemented into our government, the most prominent of these being popular sovereignty, the right to revolt, and rule of law. Popular sovereignty was a distinctly revolutionary idea, as it articulates that the ultimate power of the government comes from the people. This is exemplified by the Great Compromise of 1787, which was incorporated into the Constitution through Article 1, Section 2 and 3's system of equal representation. However, the Electoral College and the executive appointments of the judiciary are checks on the political power of the populace that still exists today. In addition, the 3/5 clause in Article 1, Section 2 is one example of how the Constitution did not adequately represent the will of all of its inhabitants through its support of slavery.
Next, the right to revolt was key to the colony secession from Great Britain. Stemming from philosopher John Locke, the right to revolt is utilized when the citizens feel that the government is not suited to their needs, so they may justifiably overthrow it. The Declaration of Independence is fully espoused this idea with its statement: whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. This principle is not explicitly in the body of the Constitution. However, it can be seen in the First Amendment, which provides for peaceful revolutions. Additionally, rule of law was extremely important to the founders, as it entails that the Constitution is the highest law of the land. The Supremacy Clause in Article 6, Section 2 states, "The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land." In order to uphold this, they created a very difficult amendment process: approval by 2/3 of Congress or state legislators, followed by ratification by 3/4 of the state. It is clear that the founders' intent was to uphold the sovereignty of higher law while allowing for a living document.
However, we feel that our current system of amending the Constitution impedes the principle of consent within our government because of its inflexibility. One example is the proposed Equal Rights Amendment, which would secure legal gender equality. Despite overwhelming support when it was introduced and currently having the necessary 38 state ratifications, the ERA has not been passed as it failed to meet a state ratification deadline. But we recognize that easily amendable constitutions can lead to convoluted and contradictory higher laws, as is the case with the Colorado amendment system of initiative. Malleable constitutions are also the tools of demagogues, as soon as a Russian vote in favor of amendments that would allow President Putin to rule for over another decade. We recognize that there must be a balance between upholding the consent of a governed and maintaining an effective government.
Modern movements on the left, like Black Lives Matter and March for Our Lives, and on the right, like the unfounded Stop the Steal movement, are inspired by the revolutionary principles that reflect our country's character. Black Lives Matter and March for Our Lives are both centered around the Lockean idea that the government should protect our fundamental right to life, while the Stop the Steal movement centers more on defending popular sovereignty. Long-sustained abuse justifies the right to revolt and establish a new government according to Locke, but due to the lack of evidence of election fraud, we believe the January 6th insurrection inspired by the Stop the Steal movement to be wholly unjustified. Nevertheless, the reaction demonstrates how central the right to revolt is to our national character. Revolutionary principles like popular sovereignty, the right to revolt, and rule of law were key to not just the Revolutionary War, but the structure of the government that followed. They continue to inspire demands for a truly representative government. We are now open for questions.
All right, so let's start off. I think I heard you say that the current process for amending the United States Constitution is a little on the difficult side. One, confirm if that was what you said, and two, if it is indeed the case, how would you change it to make it better?
Well, one way in which we could possibly change the amendment process is by looking at a referendum. And I think that we like certain elements of this idea. For example, the idea that it directly allows more of the population to have a say in their government. However, it does become a little bit tricky when it comes to the idea of minority rights, because having the majority vote on minority rights is not necessarily the best system of amending the Constitution.
A similar issue would come with the process of initiative where a group of the citizens could place an amendment on the ballot to be voted upon. So we instead think that something like a legislatively referred constitutional amendment would make more sense, because the legislature would come up with an amendment and they'd be able to process it properly and make sure that it made sense for the government before sending it to voters who might in large be uneducated on civic issues.
So we like popular sovereignty. We like the idea that the government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. But we also seem to agree with the Constitution's parameters that keep a bit of an arm's length of from the populace. You know, it's sort of, how do we balance with all of the factions we have in this country today? How do we balance the consent of the government? Can we achieve it? Can we achieve it through the Constitution that we have today, which doesn't quite vest popular sovereignty completely in the people?
I think a good balance is giving the people the right to vote. If we have the right to vote on what we believe is the best for our nation, like being able to elect the people who we think will best represent what we need, I feel that's a good balance, because how you said that there's a lot of power in the Constitution and the government has a lot of power, but we're trying to keep it more equal. And I think voting is a really good way to keep everything equal.
Connecting to this, we sort of have different levels of representation by people and how much the populace sort of sways different branches of government. For example, in the judiciary, like federal judges are appointed and then approved by the Senate. And then whereas for the legislature, for the national legislature, you've got representatives elected every 2 years, so they're much more influenced by sort of the will of the people, whereas senators are sort of built as like a cooling off area where we can sort of reflect on what what the House sends along.
Furthering what my colleague Hosanna mentioned about the principle of voting, I think that one way popular sovereignty is upheld is through this process of voting. And connecting to the second part of your question, I think that voting upholding popular sovereignty is more possible today than ever. For example, when the Constitution was first created, it severely limited the right to vote. And through the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments and the Voting Rights Act, the expansion of the right to vote has greatly increased the amount of people who are able to vote and have a direct say in their government.
All right. I thought that you referenced Locke and then referenced the January 6th events in the Capitol and said that that was wholly unjustified. How do you reconcile Locke, who says it's justified to incite revolt to protect natural rights, with regard to, say, the January 6th event or even the Portland, Oregon standoff? How do you reconcile the conflicts of Locke's philosophy and current events?
In those cases, we can see that he believed that to initiate a rebellion, there was need to be some sort of long sustained abuse. And specifically in the January 6th insurrection, it truly wasn't a long sustained abuse, as more of a reaction to what they believed without necessary evidence was unjust for them. And also that Rousseau also believed that revolution is justified in that their leaders is maintained by force alone, and in those cases there was no force that already maintained them.
Additionally, if we look at fellow Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant, no revolution is a justified one. So that's just another sort of perspective on whether or not this insurrection does count, because this insurrection, I would say, is not a revolution. And in the words of Immanuel Kant, if the government abuses power and violates the citizens' rights, they should only issue complaints or grievances, but no active resistance may be issued.
This is because we do have sort of essentially the right to revolt protected by the right to vote, because every 2 years we get to re-elect new representatives and then 4 years for presidents and whatnot. So this way we can get for some structural change for the better and sort of peaceful revolution so that violence isn't necessary.
All right, let's pivot and go a little bit of a different direction. So you talked about state amendment process a little bit so far. Many states regularly amend their constitutions in the modern era. How does that ability to easily change a constitution kind of connect with this idea of consent that we've been discussing?
I believe that the amendment for the smaller state constitutions shows consent through that it is more commonly accessible, that the people can speak their mind, speak and give their consent for what they wish, as it is much easier to amend and much easier to get what they believe in and what they require as a permanent addition to their state constitutions.
And this is valuable because states are often referred to sort of like laboratories of democracy because they can change much more easily and sort of act experimental. And this makes sense because thinking about classical republicanism, how it's believed that smaller, more homogeneous communities are like easier to run with governments, it makes sense then that you'd want these smaller communities to try out these different policies before moving on to, the entire country. For example, when Colorado legalized marijuana, we were able to sort of see the effects of that, what kind of regulations we would need in place, which would have been much more difficult to figure out if we'd done it with the entire country all at once.
Additionally, if we are choosing to focus on the Colorado Constitution, it upholds the value of consent of the governed because we use an initiated constitutional amendment process in which the constituents are the ones who propose these amendments, and then they get put on the ballot for approval and for a vote from the rest of the population. And for example, we have TABOR, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, in which local and state governments cannot raise taxes without voter approval. And so that's one way in which the consent of the governed is directly related to the Colorado Constitution.
All right, we're at time. Yay, good job. Woohoo. All right, now the judges are going to do some feedback.
All right, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. It's one of those where I always wish we had a little more time. You guys, I think, did a nice job of framing this within the Enlightenment. And I think that's kind of key to the ideas that we've been discussing today. I really liked you guys were able to bring in Colorado and kind of some local issues multiple times, talking about the inflexibility impeding progress for amendments, talking about Tabor, talking about the Colorado process for initiative petitions, Colorado marijuana. I really enjoyed that you guys were able to bring that to where you live and bring that more locally. I really enjoyed the notion of popular sovereignty being able to be connected to voting, and that more people are able to vote today, mentioning the 15th, the 19th, the 26th, the Voting Rights Act. I thought that was fantastic. Just a really good conversation. I really appreciated that.
I would echo those comments. I thought it was a really interesting and well documented and well presented conversation. I particularly liked the discussion about the thought about peaceful revolution, that that we're actually doing that every day, and also that the states can be the laboratories of democracy. And then, you know, as it was noted, tying that to Colorado and the marijuana law, or, you know, the Tabor, the taxpayer law, that, you know, taxes have to be voted on before they can be raised. I mean, those are all great examples of the states being the laboratories of democracy from which the federal government, you know, may or may not, depending on how, you know, use that to further amend federal laws. But thank you so much for a great conversation. Really great.
Okay, what I like to look for is the engagement of everybody on the team. And your team, everybody was engaged, and you were backing each other up and building off of whoever takes the question first. Because we all know that that's a scary thing to do. You get hit with the question, you're like, I don't want to take it. I'll go second or third. So I love that each of you stepped up and took the response, and then you built on what the other person had to say. And that's the sign of a good team, a good solid team that understands each other. Again, I liked how I tried to trip you up a little bit, give you some, you know, provocative type of question to see how you would handle it. You did extremely well. You dealt with the philosophy and the ideology of revolt, and how it's not necessarily has to be built on violence now. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it. Good job.
All right, good job, everyone. I am going to go ahead and stop the recording.